I drove my rusted truck to my ex-wife's engagement. She smirked until my assistant arrived in my luxury car. Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss our latest heartfelt stories. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue bringing unforgettable journeys like this one to life. We'd also love to know where you're watching from. So leave your city or country in the comments below and join viewers from around the world. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin today's story. The cruelest mistakes are often made in the first 5 seconds, when people think they already know your story. Malcolm Brooks eased his rusted pickup truck into the gravel overflow parking lot beside the country club, and the old engine answered with one last tired rumble before settling into silence. A few guests standing near the entrance turned their heads almost immediately. Their tailored suits, polished shoes, and sparkling dresses reflected the golden glow of the late afternoon sun, while Malcolm stepped out wearing a neatly pressed navy button-down shirt, dark jeans, and boots that had clearly seen years of honest work. The truck looked as though it belonged in a forgotten barn somewhere in rural Georgia, instead of outside one of Charlotte's most exclusive event venues. He closed the driver's door gently instead of slamming it, almost as if he respected the old machine for surviving every mile it had ever carried him. Beyond the tall glass entrance, music floated across the courtyard while waiters arranged trays of champagne and guests laughed beneath white floral arches prepared for Vanessa Carter's engagement celebration. Malcolm stood quietly for a moment, brushing a little dust from his sleeve before checking the time on a simple stainless steel watch that revealed nothing about the life he actually lived. He wasn't late. He wasn't early. He had arrived exactly when he intended to. A pair of young valets exchanged amused glances as one whispered something that made the other grin. Neither offered to park the pickup. Malcolm simply nodded, slipped the keys into his pocket, and began walking toward the entrance without asking for anyone's help. Inside, conversations slowed one by one as familiar faces recognized him. Some were former neighbors. Others had once shared backyard cookouts, church picnics, and holiday dinners with him and Vanessa years before everything fell apart. Their expressions shifted from surprise to quiet curiosity before settling into something much colder. They looked from Malcolm to the aging pickup still visible through the front windows, and silent conclusions spread through the room faster than any introduction ever could. Then Vanessa noticed him. She looked stunning in an elegant ivory dress that caught the light every time she turned her head. A diamond ring rested on her hand, flashing brightly whenever she accepted another congratulatory hug. For a brief moment, her smile froze. Then it returned, softer than laughter but sharper than any insult. She didn't need to say a word. That small smirk carried years of assumptions. It suggested she had expected exactly this ending for the man she once promised to spend forever with. Standing beside her, her fiancé followed her gaze until his eyes landed on Malcolm. He smiled politely at first, but after another guest leaned over and quietly explained who Malcolm was, the politeness disappeared. The man straightened his expensive jacket and looked Malcolm over from head to toe as though measuring success by fabric labels and parking spaces. Malcolm continued walking with calm, steady steps, greeting an elderly couple with a warm smile, before congratulating Vanessa with a simple nod that contained neither bitterness nor regret. Around him, conversations resumed, but now they carried an unmistakable edge. People lowered their voices while continuing to watch him from the corners of their eyes, convinced they were witnessing a man who had peaked years ago and never recovered. None of them noticed that Malcolm never once looked embarrassed. He wasn't distracted by the whispers. He wasn't searching for approval. He wasn't wondering whether he belonged there. Instead, he glanced once more at his watch, almost imperceptibly, as though he were waiting for someone else to arrive. Someone whose appearance would quietly change the meaning of every judgment already made that afternoon. Malcolm accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and thanked him with the same quiet courtesy he had always shown strangers, regardless of whether they wore a business suit or a catering uniform. The music continued drifting through the ballroom while conversation slowly returned, but every few seconds another pair of eyes found its way back to him. It was remarkable how quickly people could build an entire life story from a faded pickup truck parked outside. Years ago, Vanessa would have defended him before anyone else had the chance to judge. Back then, they had lived in a modest apartment on the south side of Charlotte where the kitchen faucet leaked every winter and the air conditioner struggled through the hottest weeks of July. They did not have much, but they had dreams large enough to fill every empty corner of those small rooms. Malcolm worked long hours during the day delivering freight for another company before spending nearly every evening studying supply chains, transportation contracts, and warehouse operations. He believed that one day he could build something of his own. Vanessa believed him too, at least in the beginning. She used to wait for him with dinner growing cold on the table because she refused to eat without him. They laughed over instant coffee instead of expensive vacations and celebrated every tiny victory as though it were the beginning of something extraordinary. The old pickup truck waiting outside the country club had carried them through those years. It had hauled secondhand furniture into their first apartment, transported supplies for Malcolm's earliest weekend jobs, and even broken down on the side of Interstate 85 during a rainstorm that somehow became one of their favorite memories because they had laughed harder than they had panicked. Life changed slowly enough that neither of them noticed at first. Malcolm became more focused with every passing month, chasing opportunities that rarely produced immediate rewards. Every dollar he earned seemed to disappear into another investment. Another permit, another warehouse lease, or another contract that promised a better future. Vanessa grew tired of hearing that success was always one more step away. Her coworkers posted photographs from beach vacations, luxury restaurants, and newly purchased homes, while she continued driving the same dependable sedan and watching her husband pour everything back into a business that still looked uncertain from the outside. She never stopped loving him overnight. Instead, disappointment accumulated quietly, one postponed celebration at a time. Conversations that had once been filled with hope gradually became filled with questions. When will all of this finally pay off? How much longer do we have to wait? Malcolm always answered with patience because he genuinely believed the breakthrough was coming. Unfortunately, faith was becoming harder for Vanessa to hold than frustration. By the time they signed the divorce papers, there had been no dramatic betrayal, no explosive argument, and no single unforgettable moment that destroyed their marriage. There had only been two people standing on opposite sides of the same dream, each convinced the other no longer understood what mattered most. Now, years later, standing beneath crystal chandeliers while guests admired another engagement ring on Vanessa's hand, Malcolm realized that almost everyone in the room believed they already knew how the story had ended. They believed she had escaped a man whose ambitions had never become reality. They believed the rusted pickup outside was proof that she had made the right decision. Malcolm neither corrected them nor defended himself. Instead, he lifted his wrist once again, glanced at the time with quiet confidence, and allowed the silence to keep telling a story that was only moments away from changing forever. The room grew warmer with conversation, yet Malcolm felt only the steady rhythm of his own breathing. He had learned years ago that silence often revealed more about other people than words ever could. Across the ballroom, clusters of guests continued stealing curious glances in his direction before leaning toward one another with restrained smiles that barely concealed their opinions. A man Malcolm vaguely remembered from neighborhood barbecues approached with a broad grin and extended his hand. "Malcolm, it has been a long time," he said warmly before letting his eyes drift toward the parking lot outside. "I saw your truck. I have to admit, I recognized it before I recognized you." Several people nearby chuckled politely. Malcolm shook his hand with genuine courtesy. "It still gets me where I need to go," he replied. "That is what matters." The answer was calm enough to disappoint anyone hoping for embarrassment. Another guest stepped closer, holding a glass of champagne. "You always were practical," she said. "I suppose some things never change." Malcolm smiled. "Some things should not." The woman laughed, although she was no longer certain whether he had agreed with her or answered something entirely different. Vanessa watched every exchange from across the room. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps even resentment, but Malcolm carried himself with the same quiet confidence he had possessed during the earliest days of their marriage. That confidence had once inspired her. Now it unsettled her because it did not match the picture everyone believed they were seeing. Her fiancé noticed her attention lingering and wrapped an arm gently around her shoulder before walking Malcolm's way. "I am glad you came," he said with polished courtesy that felt carefully rehearsed. "It takes confidence to show up after so much time." Malcolm nodded. Congratulations to both of you. I wish you every happiness. The simplicity of the blessing caught the man slightly off guard. He had expected bitterness. Instead, he received grace. Unsure how to respond, he glanced again toward the faded pickup visible beyond the windows. Well, he said with an amused smile, if you ever decide it is time for an upgrade, I know a dealership that could probably work out a payment plan. A few guests laughed more openly this time. Someone near the dessert table added that modern trucks even came with heated seats now. Another joked that perhaps everyone could pass around a collection basket before the evening ended. The remarks were delivered with smiling faces, making them easy to dismiss as harmless humor, yet each one rested upon the same quiet assumption that Malcolm had become a man deserving of pity. He neither defended himself nor challenged anyone. Instead, he thanked the server for refilling his sparkling water and stepped aside so an elderly couple could reach the buffet first. His composure slowly became more uncomfortable than any argument would have been. The harder people searched for signs of failure, the less they found in the man himself. They found no bitterness in his eyes, no desperation in his voice, no envy when he looked at Vanessa's engagement ring or the elegant celebration surrounding her. They saw only patience, and patience was difficult to explain when they had already decided his life had gone wrong. Malcolm reached into his pocket and quietly felt the familiar weight of his phone as it vibrated once. He did not answer immediately. He simply glanced at the screen, read a brief message, and allowed the smallest trace of a smile to cross his face before placing the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked toward the front entrance, not with anticipation born of anxiety, but with the calm certainty of a man whose evening was unfolding exactly according to schedule. The message on Malcolm's phone contained only 6 words. I have arrived. Waiting for your signal. It was from Naomi Reed. He locked the screen without replying and slipped the phone back into his pocket as naturally as if he had checked the weather. Across the ballroom, laughter continued to ripple through conversations while the string quartet played softly beneath crystal chandeliers. No one noticed that a single text message had quietly shifted the direction of the entire evening. Malcolm had never enjoyed surprising people for the sake of pride. In fact, most of the executives who worked for him rarely heard him mention his personal life at all. The members of his board knew him as a patient leader who preferred listening before speaking. Warehouse supervisors knew him as the chief executive who walked distribution floors without cameras or reporters following behind. Truck drivers recognized him because he still stopped to shake hands at regional terminals and remembered names long after others had forgotten them. The faded pickup waiting outside was not an act. It had remained in his garage even after every financial advisor suggested replacing it years earlier. He had restored the engine twice, replaced countless parts himself, and refused every offer collectors made to purchase it. That truck reminded him of promises, difficult mornings, and the years when success had existed only inside his imagination. Keeping it was never about money. It was about gratitude. A young employee from the catering company accidentally brushed against Malcolm while carrying a tray of desserts. The young man immediately apologized, clearly embarrassed. Malcolm smiled warmly and steadied the tray before a single plate could slide off. You are doing just fine, he said. Take your time. Everybody remembers kindness longer than perfection. The young man thanked him with visible relief before continuing through the crowd. Several nearby guests watched the exchange with quiet confusion. They expected someone carrying disappointment to spread it to others. Instead, Malcolm seemed completely at peace. Vanessa noticed it as well. Every few minutes, she caught herself looking toward him instead of listening to the congratulations surrounding her. She remembered another evening years before when Malcolm had given his winter coat to a stranger whose car had broken down during an unexpected snowstorm. He had walked nearly half a mile back to their apartment in freezing weather without mentioning it until she asked why he was shivering. That memory slipped into her thoughts without permission, and for the first time since Malcolm had arrived, uncertainty replaced confidence. Had she mistaken quiet determination for failure all those years ago, or had he simply changed after they separated? She could not answer the question because she no longer knew the man standing across the room. Her fiancé continued greeting guests, accepting handshakes and compliments, completely unaware that Vanessa's attention had begun drifting elsewhere. Outside the tall windows, the evening sky deepened into shades. of blue as luxury vehicles continued arriving one after another. Valets hurried back and forth with practiced efficiency. Then one of them paused for a brief moment and looked toward the entrance drive, his expression changing from routine professionalism to respectful surprise. Another valet quickly straightened his jacket without being asked. A third quietly reached for the front doors before any passenger had even stepped outside. Inside the ballroom, no one had yet noticed the subtle change beyond the glass. Malcolm did. He glanced once toward the entrance, then calmly reached for his glass of sparkling water. His expression never changed. He did not smile with satisfaction or anticipation. He simply took a slow sip, set the glass back onto the nearby table, and waited with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through every difficult year of his life, knowing that within moments the assumptions filling the room would begin collapsing under nothing more than the simple truth. The subtle movement outside the entrance remained unnoticed by nearly everyone inside, yet the atmosphere around Malcolm seemed to grow strangely calmer with every passing second. He was no longer observing the room. Instead, he appeared to be allowing the room to observe itself. Conversations drifted around him like distant echoes while servers carried polished silver trays between clusters of guests. Someone complimented the floral arrangements. Someone else admired the live music. Another guest laughed loudly about investment properties and vacation homes. Malcolm listened without joining any discussion. Years of leading difficult negotiations had taught him that people often revealed their priorities long before they revealed their character. Vanessa's fiancé walked onto the small stage to thank everyone for attending. His confident smile earned warm applause as he spoke about new beginnings, successful partnerships, and the exciting future that awaited him and Vanessa. Several guests raised their glasses in celebration. Malcolm joined the applause with the same respectful expression he had maintained all evening. There was no trace of resentment in his face, and that quiet dignity unsettled Vanessa more than any emotional outburst ever could have. She remembered how Malcolm used to clap just as sincerely for other people's victories, even during seasons when his own dreams remained uncertain. She had once admired that quality. Somewhere along the way, she had mistaken humility for a lack of ambition. While the applause faded, Malcolm's phone vibrated once again. He glanced down for only a brief moment before typing 3 simple words. "Come inside now." The message disappeared into the evening without attracting a single curious glance. He placed the phone back into his pocket and reached for his glass once more. Across the ballroom, one of Vanessa's college friends approached with an expression that balanced sympathy and curiosity. "Malcolm," she said gently, "it is good to see you. I hope life has been treating you well." He smiled warmly. "Life has been very generous to me." She looked momentarily confused before answering with a polite nod. From where she stood, nothing about his appearance matched the confidence of that statement. Before she could continue, another guest jokingly called across the room, "If life has been that generous, maybe it is finally time to retire that old truck." More laughter followed. Malcolm simply looked toward the windows where the fading sunlight reflected across the parking area. "Some things become more valuable because of the road they have traveled," he answered calmly. "Not everything worth keeping has to look new." His words settled over the nearby conversations with unexpected weight. A few smiles faded. Others quietly looked away. The sentence sounded less like a defense of an old vehicle and more like a truth about people themselves. At that exact moment, several valets hurried toward the circular driveway outside with unusual precision. One opened the front gate without being asked. Another straightened the red carpet leading to the entrance. Through the tall windows, the soft glow of elegant headlights swept across the stone driveway before stopping directly in front of the country club. Guests closest to the entrance instinctively turned toward the movement, assuming another distinguished visitor had arrived. The musicians continued playing, but their melody was gradually overshadowed by quiet curiosity spreading from one table to the next. Vanessa noticed the shifting attention and glanced toward the entrance herself. Malcolm did not. He remained exactly where he was, his posture relaxed, his expression composed, as though the arrival outside belonged to an ordinary evening rather than a moment capable of rewriting every assumption that had filled the ballroom since he first stepped through the doors in his weathered pickup truck. The quiet curiosity that had been spreading through the ballroom slowly transformed into complete attention. Conversations faded one after another as more guests turned toward the entrance, trying to discover who deserved such unusual treatment from the valet staff. The elegant sedan resting beneath the evening lights reflected the glow of the chandeliers through the tall glass windows, its polished finish standing in striking contrast to the weathered pickup still parked farther away in the gravel lot. Malcolm remained exactly where he was, neither turning toward the entrance nor making any effort to attract attention. He simply rested one hand lightly against the back of an empty chair while watching the musicians finish another graceful piece. His calmness made the moment feel even more mysterious. Vanessa followed the direction of everyone else's gaze before looking back toward Malcolm. For the first time since he had arrived, she noticed something she had completely overlooked. He had never once appeared uncomfortable. He had never searched for sympathy, never tried to explain himself, never reacted to the jokes, and never attempted to impress anyone. It was almost as though he had expected every whispered comment before walking through the doors. That realization unsettled her far more than the expensive automobile outside ever could. Her fiancé smiled confidently as he welcomed another group of arriving guests, still assuming the newest visitors had come to celebrate the engagement. "Looks like someone important finally made it," one guest whispered with excitement. Another quietly guessed that. It must be a well-known investor or perhaps the owner of one of the luxury developments being built across the city. Several people instinctively adjusted their jackets and dresses, hoping to make a favorable impression before the distinguished guest entered the ballroom. Malcolm simply looked toward the windows for the briefest moment before lowering his eyes to the watch on his wrist once again. Everything was unfolding precisely according to schedule. Outside, one of the valets respectfully opened the rear passenger door. Instead of an older executive or a wealthy couple stepping out, a poised woman in a tailored charcoal business suit emerged with measured confidence. Naomi Reed carried a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm and a tablet in her hand. She thanked the valet with a warm smile before speaking quietly for a few seconds. The valet nodded immediately and stepped aside with unmistakable respect. Through the glass, several guests watched her begin walking toward the entrance. She moved with the composed efficiency of someone accustomed to boardrooms, private meetings, and demanding schedules. There was nothing theatrical about her arrival. She was simply doing her job. Yet her presence immediately changed the energy surrounding the evening. Vanessa studied the unfamiliar woman carefully, searching her memory for recognition. She found none. Her fiancé leaned closer and quietly asked whether Naomi might be a business associate of one of their guests. Vanessa shook her head. She had no idea. Across the ballroom, Malcolm finally lifted his eyes toward the entrance just as the doors opened. The room naturally grew quieter, expecting another celebrated guest to be welcomed with introductions and applause. Instead, Naomi walked past every smiling host, every curious conversation, and every extended glance without slowing her pace. She did not stop to greet Vanessa. She did not acknowledge the fiancé. She did not pause to admire the decorations or accept a glass of champagne. Her attention never drifted from the single destination she had crossed the room to reach. Malcolm watched her approach with the same relaxed expression he had carried throughout the evening, while every person who had spent the last hour judging the man beside the faded pickup truck unknowingly held their breath, sensing that the story they believed they understood was only seconds away from becoming something entirely different. Naomi crossed the ballroom with calm, measured steps that carried none of the hesitation everyone expected from a stranger entering a private celebration. Every polished shoe striking the marble floor seemed to quiet another conversation until the only sounds remaining were the fading notes of the string quartet and the gentle clink of crystal glasses being lowered onto linen-covered tables. Guests instinctively shifted aside to give her room, assuming she was searching for the hosts or perhaps an important investor whose arrival had been delayed. Vanessa straightened her posture, preparing to welcome the elegantly dressed woman with the practiced smile she had worn throughout the evening. Her fiancé adjusted his jacket once again and stepped slightly forward, ready to introduce himself. Naomi walked directly past both of them without slowing for even a single heartbeat. The welcoming smile on Vanessa's face gradually disappeared as Naomi continued moving through the crowd with quiet purpose. She passed the engagement display, ignored the floral arrangements, and never once glanced toward the stage. Instead, she stopped precisely where Malcolm stood. For a brief second, the ballroom seemed suspended in complete silence. Naomi offered Malcolm a respectful smile before speaking in the warm, professional tone she always used inside executive boardrooms. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks. I apologize for the slight delay. Traffic leaving the airport was heavier than expected." Malcolm returned the smile with effortless familiarity. "You arrived exactly when I asked you to, Naomi. There is nothing to apologize for." She handed him the leather portfolio and the tablet she had carried from the car. "Tomorrow's board presentation has been updated. The directors have already confirmed attendance, and the investors from Dallas requested to move the meeting 30 minutes earlier. I made the adjustment to your schedule." Malcolm accepted the portfolio with a simple nod. "Excellent. Thank you." Naomi continued naturally, completely unaware that every guest in the ballroom was listening to every word. "Your driver has completed the vehicle inspection, and the conference team has already prepared everything for your arrival after tonight's event. If you prefer, we can leave in about 15 minutes and still reach the airport ahead of schedule." Malcolm glanced briefly toward the windows before answering. "That should work perfectly." The conversation lasted less than a minute, yet it dismantled every assumption that had filled the room since Malcolm had stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered jokes about old vehicles or payment plans. Several guests exchanged confused looks, silently trying to reconcile the composed executive standing before them with the man they had spent the evening pitying. Vanessa stared at Malcolm as though she were seeing someone she had never truly known. She recognized his voice, his smile, and the quiet confidence that had once comforted her during difficult years, yet everything surrounding him now belonged to a world she had never imagined. Her fiancé frowned slightly while searching Malcolm's face with growing uncertainty. The name Brooks stirred something familiar in his memory, but he could not immediately place it. One of the older guests quietly reached into his pocket, unlocked his phone beneath the table, and searched for the company logo printed discreetly on the portfolio Naomi had handed Malcolm. Within seconds, his eyes widened. He looked up at Malcolm, then back at the screen, then toward the elegant sedan outside the entrance before slowly lowering the phone again. The color gradually drained from his expression. Without intending to, he had just connected the final pieces of a story everyone else had misunderstood from the very beginning. The silence lingering across the ballroom no longer belonged to curiosity. It belonged to realization. The guests who had laughed only minutes earlier now avoided looking at one another, as though every careless joke had suddenly become impossible to defend. Malcolm remained exactly as he had been since the beginning of the evening. His shoulders were relaxed. His voice stayed even. His expression carried neither satisfaction nor resentment. Naomi stood beside him, waiting patiently while he reviewed the schedule displayed on the tablet. "The board has also confirmed the acquisition documents," she said quietly. "The legal department expects your approval tomorrow morning before the shareholders arrive." Malcolm nodded once. "Please thank the entire team for working late. They have earned a restful weekend after the meeting." "I will let them know, Mr. Brooks," Naomi answered. "They will appreciate hearing that from you." Several guests exchanged bewildered glances. Executive board, shareholders, acquisition, legal department. None of those words fit the image they had created the instant Malcolm stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. The older gentleman who had searched the company logo finally spoke in a hushed voice to the people nearest him. "Brooks Global Logistics," he whispered. "He is talking about Brooks Global Logistics." The name spread quietly through the room, moving from one conversation to another until more phones appeared beneath tables. Within moments, faces that had been filled with amusement transformed into disbelief. Brooks Global Logistics was not a struggling local business. It had become one of the fastest-growing transportation companies in the Southeast, managing distribution networks across multiple states while securing contracts with several Fortune 500 corporations. Magazine articles praised its disciplined leadership. Business journals highlighted its remarkable expansion. Yet the photographs accompanying those stories rarely focused on the chief executive himself, because Malcolm had always declined publicity whenever possible. Vanessa's fiancé reached into his own pocket and searched the company name. As image after image appeared on his screen, his confident smile slowly disappeared. There, standing beside governors, business leaders, and charitable organizations, was the same quiet man everyone had spent the evening underestimating. The tailored suits in those photographs were different, but the calm eyes and gentle smile were unmistakable. He looked from the screen to Malcolm and then toward the faded pickup outside, struggling to understand why someone capable of purchasing almost any luxury vehicle would still choose to drive something so ordinary. Vanessa followed his gaze. Her breathing slowed as memories returned one after another with painful clarity. She remembered Malcolm refusing expensive birthday gifts because he preferred investing in their future. She remembered him repairing that old truck in the driveway with his own hands on quiet Saturday mornings. She remembered telling him that one day he needed to stop living like a man who expected tomorrow to solve everything. At the time, she believed she had been encouraging him to be realistic. Now she wondered whether she had simply failed to recognize extraordinary patience while it was standing beside her every day. Malcolm closed the leather portfolio and handed the tablet back to Naomi. "Thank you for bringing everything," he said. "I appreciate you making the trip." Naomi smiled warmly. "It is always a pleasure, Mr. Brooks." There was no dramatic announcement, no speech explaining his success, no attempt to correct the people who had judged him. The truth revealed itself naturally through the ordinary respect others showed him. That quiet respect carried far more weight than any boast ever could, and in the stillness that filled the ballroom, everyone understood that the greatest difference between Malcolm and the image they had imagined was not the money he possessed. It was the character he had carried long before anyone realized who he truly was. No one asked Malcolm to stay longer. No one asked him to explain himself. The ballroom had become strangely quiet, as though every person present had suddenly realized that the most important lesson of the evening had arrived without a speech. Malcolm looked around the room one final time, not with triumph, but with gratitude. Many of the faces before him had shared chapters of his life years earlier. They had celebrated birthdays with him, attended neighborhood cookouts, and watched him chase dreams that seemed too ambitious for the circumstances he lived in. Time had changed everyone in different ways. Some had gained wealth. Some had gained comfort. Some had gained confidence. Yet somewhere along the journey, many had also learned to measure people by appearances instead of character. Malcolm refused to let that realization harden his heart. He turned toward Vanessa and offered the same gentle smile he had carried since arriving. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "I hope your future brings you peace and happiness." There was no hidden meaning behind the words, no lingering resentment, only kindness. Vanessa opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came. The confident smile she had worn throughout the celebration had quietly disappeared. Looking at Malcolm now, she understood that the greatest misunderstanding of her life had not been about money. It had been about patience. She had believed success would always announce itself loudly. Malcolm had built his life proving that real success rarely needed an audience. Her eyes drifted toward the weathered pickup truck still visible through the windows. For years she had remembered it as a symbol of struggle. Tonight it had become something entirely different. It represented perseverance, loyalty to forgotten beginnings, and a man who had never been ashamed of where he started. Her fiancé finally stepped forward, extending his hand with genuine respect instead of polite obligation. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "it was an honor meeting you." Malcolm accepted the handshake warmly. "Please call me Malcolm." The simple response dissolved whatever distance titles might have created. There was no arrogance in him, no desire to make anyone feel small after they had underestimated him. Naomi quietly approached once more. "Your driver is ready whenever you are," she said. Malcolm nodded. "Thank you." Together they began walking toward the entrance. This time the crowd naturally stepped aside without being asked. Nobody whispered. Nobody laughed. Several guests quietly wished him a safe trip. Others offered respectful smiles that carried an unspoken apology they could not quite express aloud. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than before. The elegant sedan waited beneath the soft lights of the entrance while the old pickup rested farther away in the gravel exactly where Malcolm had left it. Naomi glanced toward the weathered truck with a smile. "You still cannot bring yourself to let it go, can you?" Malcolm looked at the old vehicle for a long moment before answering. "It reminds me that every destination begins somewhere ordinary." Naomi smiled knowingly because she had heard him say those words before. The driver opened the rear door of the luxury sedan, But Malcolm did not enter immediately. Instead, he walked several steps toward the pickup and rested his hand lightly against the worn metal of its door. The truck had carried hope long before it had ever carried success. After a quiet moment, he returned to the waiting sedan and settled into the rear seat. As the car pulled away from the country club, Vanessa remained standing behind the glass entrance, watching the taillights disappear into the distance until they became nothing more than two fading points of light against the Carolina night. She did not envy Malcolm's wealth. She envied the peace he had found without needing anyone else's approval. And as the celebration slowly resumed behind her, she finally understood a truth that would stay with her long after the music ended. Malcolm had never come back to win her again. He had come back having already won himself.